Welcome everyone, both friend and stranger, old and new, to this time of worship in the Unitarian tradition. My name is Diane Rutter and I'm the lay assistant here at Kingswood Meeting House in Hollywood in the West Midlands. My thanks as always go to our organist extraordinaire, Mr. Peter Flower, whose musical and technical skills and patience allow us to keep the Kingswood worshipping community alive and thriving. So let's begin this service by lighting our chalice candle, as Unitarians and Unitarian Universalists do the world over. And in doing so, we invite the divine into our hearts and homes as we worship. And our chalice lighting words today are by Edward C. Lynn. We light the flame of knowledge, may understanding be with us. We light the flame of love, may caring be among us. We light the flame of holiness, may the unifying spirit be within us. Amen. My first reading for you today is from the Old Testament, and it's from Judges chapter 3, and it's the story of Ehud and Eglon. The Israelites again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord strengthened King Eglon of Moab against Israel because they had done what was evil in the sight of the Lord. In alliance with the Ammonites and the Amalekites, he went and defeated Israel, and they took possession of the city of palms. The Israelites served King Eglon of Moab for 18 years. But when the Israelites cried out to the Lord raised up for them a deliverer, Ehud, son of Gera, the Benjaminite, a left-handed man, and that's very important, do remember that. The Israelites sent tribute by him to King Eglon of Moab. Ehud made for himself a sword with 2 edges, a cubit in length, and he fastened it on his right thigh under his clothes. Then he presented the tribute to the King Eglon of Moab. Now, Eglon was a very fat man, and that's also very integral to the story. When Ehud had finished presenting the tribute, he sent the people who carried the tribute on their way. But he himself turned back at the sculptured stones near Gilgal and said, "I have a secret message for you, O king." So the king said, "Silence," and all his attendants went out from his presence. Ehud came to him while he was sitting alone in his cool roof chamber and said, "I have a message from God for you." So he rose from his seat. Then Ehud reached with his left hand, took the sword from his right thigh and thrust it into Eglon's belly. The hilt also went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, for he did not draw the sword out of his belly, and the dirt came out. Then Ehud went out into the vestibule and closed the doors of the roof chamber on him and locked them. After he had gone, the servants came. When they saw that the doors of the roof chamber were locked, they thought, "He must be relieving himself in the cool chamber." So they waited until they were embarrassed. When he still did not open the doors of the roof chamber, they took the key and opened them, and there was their lord lying dead on the floor. Ehud escaped while they delayed and passed beyond the sculptured stones and escaped to Seirah. And that's the story of Ehud and Eglon. I invite you now to a short time of prayer, and if you care to, please join with me in saying the words of the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, for ever and ever. Amen. My next reading for you today is a story from one of our favourite books, 100 Wisdom Stories from Around the World, which is edited by Margaret Silf. And this is called A Beautiful Friendship, which is a retelling of a traditional story. There was once a beautiful woman who used to walk through the streets of the town, and everywhere she went, she was noticed. Everyone in the town wanted to talk to her, listen to her, ask her questions and spend time with her. In the same town, there was a poor girl dressed in rags. She too was very beautiful, but no one ever noticed her or wanted to have anything to do with her. She was lonely and sad. She would gaze at the beautiful and finely dressed woman and see how much attention everyone paid to her. And she wished so much that people would pay attention to her too. She had so much in her heart that she wanted to share, but no one would listen. So one day the poor little girl in rags plucked up courage to speak to the beautiful lady in the fine clothes. "Please," she said timidly, "excuse me, but may I ask you a favour?" The fine lady, who was a very kind person, turned around at once and smiled at the poor girl. "Of course," she replied. "What can I do for you?" "Well," ventured the poor girl, "it's like this. You are very beautiful and finely dressed, and everyone takes notice of you. But I am poor and have no fine clothes, and no one ever notices me. It would make me so happy if just for one day I might hide myself inside your beautiful cloak and walk around with you through the town. Then, whenever people stop to notice you, they would also be paying attention to me. And I think I have something important to tell them that they would value if only they knew." The fine, elegant lady readily agreed to the poor girl's request. So the very next morning, she wrapped her fine cape around the poor girl, and they walked together through the town. Everywhere, as usual, people stopped to admire the fine lady, and when they did so, they also paid attention to the poor girl wrapped in the fine lady's cloak. As they walked, the fine lady talked with the poor girl. She asked all about her and was very interested in everything she had to say. She discovered just how wise the poor ragged girl was, and they quickly became the best of friends. So much so that after that day, they never wanted to be parted, and to this day, they still walk through the world together. And the name of the poor little girl in rags? She is called Truth. And her great friend in the beautiful clothes, whom everyone admires, her name is Story. And I've actually got some notices and announcements for you this week. If you're watching this early in the morning, chapel will once again be open for private prayer between the hours of 10:30 and 12:30 Sundays. And if you're watching it later, I'm sorry you've missed it, but that's when we're open. Also, we are now open for collections for the food bank. We'd be very grateful for any donations you could give us for this. And as usual, Geraldine will collect all donations on the last Sunday of the month. Some of us at the moment are meeting up at the tea room at Manor Farm or Earlswood Craft Centre, depending on how you know it. And we're meeting there on Tuesdays from 10:30 onwards for either a late breakfast or an early lunch. And Thursday lunchtime devotions this week will again once be posted on the Facebook and WhatsApp group at approximately 12:30 p.m. And we have to wish our Peter's mum, Mrs. Jill Flower, a very happy birthday for this weekend. Very happy birthday, Jill, and we hope you enjoy your day. And so once more we come to a time of prayer. We close our eyes and remember those near to us whom we know best. And at the same time, we acknowledge with awe how much there is in each of them which is beyond our understanding. We think of men, women, and children throughout the earth of whom we have no personal knowledge, but who are involved in events which we hear of in the news, and those everywhere who make up the ordinary daily flow of human experience. We are aware of them as a great mass of varied joys and sorrows, hopes and fears of every sort of personal relationship, and our hearts begin to respond in sympathy. But how faintly compared with the depth and reality of each person involved. In silence, let us now bring before the Divine Spirit through the thoughts of our hearts and minds. And so we cry to you, the universal Spirit, to whom all hearts are open. In you we all live and move and have our being. Take us more fully into your universal love and concern. Strengthen us, bring us to unity, and bring us together into larger life. Amen. I was very fortunate to be able to study biblical texts at the University of Manchester. And there I was introduced to the scholarship of Professor Giza Famesh, whose complete Dead Sea Scrolls in English, the non-biblical texts, was published by Penguin Classics, and it was part of one of my courses. And Famesh, in his introduction to his book, writes, "If one had to single out the most revolutionary novelty furnished by Qumran, its contribution to our understanding of the genesis of Jewish literary compositions could be justifiable by our primary choice. Comparative study of biblical manuscripts, where no two copies display the same text, attested in a number of sometimes startlingly different redactions, has revealed in one leading scholar's words, insufficiently controlled copying. In my view, however, the phenomenon would be better described as scribal creative freedom. The scrolls indicate that diversity, not uniformity, reigned there and then, and that redactor copyists felt free to improve the composition which they were reproducing." My first copy of the Bible I received is small, it's white with gold patterns, and the text is that of the King James Version. It was given at my naming ceremony as a very small child. The second copy, given to me as a teenager, is a marvellous colour edition of the Good News Bible with historical, cultural and religious notes. It also has some very beautiful photographs. And both books were given to me by my Uncle Arthur and my Aunt Irene. And since then, I have purchased or been given different copies and different translations of the Western Christian Bible, part of whose texts are based on that Jewish literature that Professor Famesh spoke of. Now, I admit freely that I've not read any of these texts all the way through. I was not brought up to believe that knowledge of these texts was my salvation. And my Uncle Arthur and I used to have many chats in the car as he transported me to and from Cone, where he, Auntie Irene and my cousin Simon lived to spend my school holidays. It was he that told me there's no such thing as good taste or bad taste, just different taste. It was he that told me that the Bible was a collection of poetry, wisdom, and someone else's religious history, and how wonderful some of these stories could be. This thought was echoed by my tutor in later years, for it didn't matter what religion or denomination my tutors followed, if any. As academics, they stepped outside themselves to look at the texts, and that was what us students were asked to do too. Now, I don't know if some of you know that I was a teaching assistant in a high school in Swinton before I came here to Kingswood. And in the English literature lessons, they now teach something called TAPS. Text, Audience, Purpose and Style. We probably dissected text in the same way at school, but I don't remember that acronym. And this was one of the methods we used at university when exegeting, that is, dissecting texts. Now, I admit to a preference for the Old Testament, orally transmitted for many hundreds of years before being written down, allowed these texts to percolate for much longer than those of the New Testament. And there always seemed to be much more moralizing in the New Testament. The Old Testament had much more interesting stories. Now, both the New Testament and Old Testament texts were communicating a belief to a populace that was, in the main, illiterate, and so they had to make their stories memorable. The Bible would be a very dry tome indeed if it had just told the truth in a straightforward fashion. Jesus, being an observant Jew and having been brought up in their literary tradition, understood this very well, hence the parables. The tales of a widow losing coins, virgins running out of oil, and the like. This tradition was also understood by the New Testament authors in the way they recounted the miracles, the signs, the journeys and the preachings of Jesus. The New Testament and Old Testament are very different in style because of the audience they were written for, and also because of the different eras in which they were written. However, their purpose remains the same, and I'm with the Qumran scribes, Uncle Arthur and Professor Vermesh on allowing the author and thus the reader to interpret as they will. I think that you'll find that most Unitarians do not believe in a literal translation of the biblical texts, or that they were dictated by God and written down by scribes at God's behest. At university, and still to some extent now, I've enjoyed nothing more than ferreting amongst commentaries and comparing the different translations and meanings that better scholars than I have come up with. I think that Unitarianism lends itself to scribal creative freedom. I love that phrase. Being able to discover spiritual meaning for yourself. There is great freedom in being allowed to think for yourself. Another set of texts we looked at university were the apocryphal texts, or as they are more properly called, the intertestamental texts of the Greco-Roman period. Books such as Tobit, Bel and the Dragon, Judith and Maccabees 1, 2, 3 and 4. I'll give you a dictionary definition of Apocrypha. Books included in the Septuagint and Vulgate, but excluded from the Jewish and Protestant canons of the Old Testament, or early Christian writings, not included in the New Testament. These are books you may have heard of that did not make what is known as the canon, the actual Bible itself, in some places. Now, in some Protestant Bibles, you'll find them sandwiched between the Old and the New Testaments. The Roman Catholics place them differently, and other denominations, such as the Ethiopian Church, have their own canon altogether. And these apocryphal texts were written at a time when the Jewish diaspora was expanding, and the authors thought that the Jewish abroad needed something to remind them of their heritage. One of my favourites is the Book of Tobit, and I used to say in class that it would make a great panto. It's all about reminding Jewish people to marry a nice Jewish girl or boy. So back to Ehud and Eglon. Lots of lovely description in this story. Eglon was very fat and Ehud was left-handed. A Benjamin, and that's what Benjamin means, Ben Yad Min, son of the left hand, which is the joke of the story, because of course it was more usual to be right-handed at the time. And so the story infers that the guards only checked the left side of Eglon's body for a weapon, because you would draw it like this. Now you may get a mirror image, so I hope you can think what I'm talking about. I've always imagined lots of little Jewish boys at shul of a Saturday morning sat listening to this story and sniggering away. I studied this story at uni and I'd never heard of it before. Does it mean never let the right hand know what the left is doing? Does it mean that left-handed people are more cunning? Or is it a story to keep schoolboys entertained whilst teaching them what you can achieve with the help from God? Now at this point, I must give you an explanation of the phrase covering your feet, because that's what makes the story very funny. It can mean dirt, entrails or intestines, although one Jewish commentary I read at university put it quite plainly, it meant excrement. It was the common phrase used for the act of defecation at the time, and if you want a clearer explanation, I'll demonstrate it for you when next we meet. The joke here is that the servants thought that Eglon might be on the toilet, whilst the truth was that his entrails were all over the place, and that Eglon was so fat that the sword disappeared into his stomach. Once heard, this story's never forgotten. Now, as is the Unitarian tradition, you are at liberty to disagree or go away and study the text for yourself. The New Jerome Biblical Commentary says of this text, the prose is rich and repetitive and therefore liable to damage in translation. And furthermore it says, representing a much more appealing and less didactic mode of storytelling, The story of Ehud and Eglon is vivid in its caricature of the fat king who is bested by the crafty Israelites. Divine action in a human world. You may be interested to know that Ehud and the Israelites beat the enemy in battle after this incident and went on to live in peace for 80 years, until, that is, the Israelites once more did what was wrong in the sight of the Lord after Ehud's death. They kept on doing it and doing it. Divine action in a human world, communicated by appealing storytelling. And isn't it always the best stories from the Bible that we remember? And the story of a beautiful friendship illustrates how this works in life. The first time I read this story, it made a big impression, so much so that I never forgot it, and that was the author's intention. Story and truth together makes better telling, and people remember it. What keeps me a Unitarian is the fact that I can extract from texts what I find relevant. I don't feel guilty about agreeing or disagreeing with scholars and lay people alike, as long as I don't dismiss evidence out of hand, and as long as I have examined the evidence properly. Views of the Bible have changed over millennia. Look at the schisms belief has wrought. Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Ethiopians, Protestants, the conservative, Orthodox, liberal, progressive views of texts, the apocryphal. And that's just the Christians, and it happens in every religion, even Unitarianism. After giving my first service many years ago, the local minister, who happened to be in the congregation at the time, said, "I see you're not afraid of using the word God then." I won't ever rely on just the Bible for my spiritual fodder. There are many texts in the world from which I gain spiritual insight. And we have the capacity to examine all things, even if at first we don't understand them. But we shouldn't be afraid to explore them. Again, even if it's to say, "I don't like that, I'll leave that behind." At least we've looked at it. We also have the capacity to allow others to think for themselves too. We don't believe that ours is the only and the right way. We do not believe anyone will burn in hell if they don't believe as we do. The world is rich in its diversity. Embrace what you can. Explore what you can. Accept what you can. There is no right and wrong in spiritual matters. If it fills your need, does not harm yourself or others, is not force-fed but feeds your soul, then follow that path. You may find meaning that others don't, and vice versa. You may find that both fact and fiction have meaning for you. I don't know how many of you have ever read the Bible from cover to cover, or, like me, dip into old favourites. There's a little something for everyone there. Humour, pathos, poetry, wisdom, love, comfort, sadness, joy, a lot of stories imparting what the authors knew of human nature and struggle, and the love of a God who understands and cares for us. Tales of community life, the niggles and hardships, the friendships and caring, births, deaths, marriages, wars, peace, love, jealousies, plants, animals, disasters, family life. People facing the same things we find in life today. I wonder if they wanted to say, we got through our lives with God's love. You can too, if you take the time to read it. There's nothing new under the sun. These authors took the time and trouble to pass on what they knew, what they thought might help future generations, and their passion for a divinity they believed was with them in everything they did. They believed they were punished and rewarded by their God. What they wrote and what we now take from their texts may not be one and the same thing. They were different people in different times. The books I most enjoy these days are those that get their message across with a good story and a sense of humour. And for my spiritual needs, I quite enjoy a Robert Fulgham, an Eddie Askew, a Sarah Jane Mauldin, and a Nancy J. Crumbine, to name but a few. It's all in the storytelling. It's all about unpicking the meaning from the text and from life. Amen. And so our worship draws to a close, and I leave you with these words by Judith Urquhart. May the power and the mystery go before you to show you the way. May it shine above you to lighten your world, lie beneath you to bear you up, and walk with you and give you companionship, and glow and flow within you to bring you joy. Amen.